Welcome back to the Solid Verbal Boys and Girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrandt. As always, that fine gentleman over there, the one, the only, still the incomparable Dan Rubenstein, checking in from the heart of the Midwest. We will have a very special guest with us momentarily. Don't forget, wherever you listen, make sure you hit subscribe or follow so that you don't miss any of the episodes all off season long. Also go on out and check verballers.com. That is our Patreon, where you get ad-free episodes, bonus content, Discord access, much, much more. Dan Rubenstein, sir, good sir.
Yeah.
How goes it out there in the heart of the Midwest?
Really well, Ty. It goes really well, really good, whatever it goes. I took a long walk today because I had to drop a car off to get a tire changed, and felt the breeze, felt the
flat
cool.
tire.
What was
the deal there?
Tire shot. It's okay though, because I was reintroduced to the act of walking for 25 minutes, and it felt great, Ty. It was invigorating, and I'm ready to roll, Ty. It gave me something a little extra, a little bonus.
I'm going to welcome in our guest, Ari Wasserman from The Athletic, with a very important question kind of on the heels of that. Ari, how many times in your life have you changed a tire?
Zero.
Yeah.
Zero. Dan,
that
what
was
about
a pretty.
you?
Dan knew the answer to that one before.
I've contributed to a tire changing, but I was not the sole changer. I helped remove a flat tire and jack up the car and change the tire.
If you were on a deserted highway, do you think you could figure out how to do it
if I were given like a tire iron and a jack and a spare and everything?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've taken off whatever it is, nuts, bolts, whatever those are, on a tire. So unlimited time, nobody watching.
Yeah, this isn't like Indy 500 pit crew style. I'm at like, you just need to get it on there so that you can get to point B.
Yeah. If it weren't me like on The Amazing Race in 4K doing it and having that kind of pressure, if you gave me a solid 5 hours on the middle of like a 71-degree sunny day, yes, I could.
You could do it a lot quicker than that. It is not that difficult.
I'm just saying I would need that to feel comfortable and no pressure. That's all.
Ari Wasserman, how are you, my friend? It's been a while.
Good. I'm sweating a little bit thinking about the scenario of being caught in that situation. I would probably just die. I don't know. 4K or 5 hours. I don't know what scenario I would need, but yeah, I'm doing really well. And it's January 31st as we're recording this today, and I'm still waiting for the college football offseason. But that is kind of what makes this sport great as it continues to evolve, and I'm happy to be here.
The title of this episode is February Heat Check. February Heat Check. So we're still waiting for that offseason as well. But we're kind of at the precipice of hopefully that moment in the quote-unquote offseason when it actually starts to feel that way. So we pondered together, Dan and I, this episode a little bit earlier. And what exactly is this, Dan Rubenstein?
So what we're doing is we're going to take a number of schools or situations within schools, teams, whatever, and say, here's what happened during bowl season. Here's what has happened early on in the offseason in January. And we're going to do a BTU check. So that's bowl thermal unit, but it's really bowl and off-season because I think it's what British thermal units is what the actual BTUs are, a measure of heat energy. And so Ty and I each have a handful of these. We're going to discuss it amongst all three of us, the scorching level, or maybe it's just a candlelight. Maybe it's a healthy fireplace fire. Maybe it's, a roaring blaze, a forest fire. Who knows? We're anti-forest fire on this show, to be clear. But we're going to go through a number of scenarios and figure out where the heat is during these cold months.
Before we get there, though, here is my question. I don't want to dwell too much on either of these two stories because, frankly, we don't have all the information yet. We still don't know what the full Michigan staff is going to look like under Chiron Moore. We still don't know what the roster is going to look like when the transfer window closes for the Michigan roster.
Right.
Who knows, right? A lot can happen between now and then. Also, we still don't have all the information about the ongoing, assumingly ongoing Tennessee investigation by the NCAA into NIL and Spire Sports Group and Nico Iamaleava. Did I get that? I think I got that.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah. You got the first 80%. I think you kind of fell apart there at the end.
I had the phonetic spelling, and I still
The Danish judges were
it.
not impressed with how you stuck the landing. Yeah.
Iamaleava.
Yeah.
Which of those two stories to you, Ari Wasserman, is a bigger deal? The Tennessee deal or Chiron Moore taking over for Jim Harbaugh?
Bigger deal and staying power, I think, are very different in this scenario because I think that, it is possible that the Michigan story could get thrust back into the main picture if the NCAA comes out with more information as regards to the Connor Stallion situation. I don't know that I'm on high alert for some big paradigm-shifting revelation there. But I think that the Tennessee stuff is a bigger deal, not because of what happens to Tennessee, but because of what this lawsuit and similar lawsuits like it are going to mean for the framework of the sport moving forward. Because we're not really arguing the Tennessee break the rules, they use a private jet, whatever, blah, blah, blah. We know, how to kind of interpret what they did and whether or not that was right. It's whether or not it's a sustainable model and rules that are in place that can be restrictive of what people are able to earn and when they're able to earn it, thus maybe putting an end to any NIL regulations at all, which then puts us into a completely different scenario, at least above board. I think there are people that are still kind of navigating that in a way where there are no rules, but saying there are no rules might change it even more. So to me, I think the one that's staying power, the one that's more influential would be the Tennessee one, just based on what this means for not just Tennessee, but the entire sport.
Yeah, and the chancellor of Tennessee came out and ripped the NCAA.
I mean, speaking of BTUs, coming out hot, Ty.
I mean, talk about firing the take cannon. Quote, instead, 2.5 years of vague and contradictory NCAA memos, emails, and quote-unquote guidance about name, image, and likeness has created extraordinary chaos that student athletes and institutions are struggling to navigate. In short, the NCAA is failing. Between what happened recently at Michigan, it seems as if the powers that be are not afraid to go back at the NCAA, which maybe should have been the writing on the wall that the power of the institution is not what it once was. But the news came out, I guess, shortly after all of this news broke, or at least some of the rumors broke, that now the attorneys general of Tennessee and Virginia have filed a joint suit against the NCAA in the Eastern District of Tennessee, claiming, quote, that the NCAA is enforcing rules that unfairly restrict how athletes can commercially use their NIL, name, image, and likeness, at a critical juncture in the recruiting calendar. So, yeah, a lot more to come on that front. Dan, you're married into a Michigan household.
It's an Oregon household, but yes, continue.
You married into Michigan royalty.
I know. Yeah.
What was your take upon hearing that Chiron Moore was handed the job at Michigan? Like, it wasn't a huge surprise. We talked about it on the show. We, I think, assumed as much. But now that it's official, now that the portal window is open for guys on that roster and they're trying to figure out what the staff looks like, Jesse Minter has left. The strength coach has left.
Ben Herbert, yep.
Has your opinion of that changed at all?
I like that you're connecting this hire to the reaction in my household, as if my wife, who watches no Michigan football, was like really hoping Ben Herbert stuck around and like maybe Junior Colson would rethink his NFL decision or something.
Sure.
There wasn't a lot of pushback either way with the decision to keep Chiron Moore. It was, they hired Moore, right? And they're like, yes. Oh, okay. And then it was on to something else. Look, my opinion of it, given Michigan proximity, I guess, because I do have Michigan friends who do care about this. And it seems reasonable. It seems like the move, obviously, for continuity's sake, when you're a national championship caliber program, even with whatever Michigan's going to lose on both sides of the ball, which seems to be considerable, especially with J.J. McCarthy declaring for the draft. Looks like an Alex Orji team in this moment. But what Chiron Moore has been able to do on the recruiting trail, what he was able to do as the head coach for half of the regular season, for what he will likely be able to do in terms of keeping the remaining younger promising players, guys like Kenneth Grant and Will Johnson, Mason Graham on this roster. We've seen what happened with Alabama. We saw what happened with Washington when a prominent head coach leaves this late in the game. And so Michigan was probably looking at this like, we can't go back down to the studs with how difficult the Big Ten is becoming. And so it seemed like Chiron Moore did a good job proving himself in that role. He's under 40. And so, it's energy, it's promise, it's potential. He doesn't cost a lot. So especially at this point in the calendar, kind of seemed like a no-brainer.
Ari, I wanted to ask you this because you follow recruiting a lot closer than Dan and I. One of the things that comes up frequently whenever a very successful coach leaves is, okay, he's leaving it They just won the national championship. The continuity, we have, I think, focused in on that with Chiron Moore now taking over in Ann Arbor. What in your mind is the risk for Michigan of longer term, this guy being able to sustain that? Because it doesn't have the name recognition of Jim Harbaugh, but to Dan's point from a couple episodes ago, he has sort of been recruiting this roster like in his own way since the at least beginning of the season, because he has had several bites at the apple to coach this team.
And you mean like current players staying in terms of that?
Current players staying, recruiting new talent to kind of keep the train rolling.
The thing with Michigan that's kind of been interesting to me in general is how they were able to win a national title without really ever signing a top 7 or 8 class during the previous 4 or 5 cycles. So the recruiting of new talent there has always kind of been a hot button issue, because I've always maintained that I believe that they could be doing better. And I don't know what the reason that they don't do better, considering, the academic institution that it is, how cool Ann Arbor is, the storied program, the winged helmets, the facilities. I mean, everything that you could have to sell. The money is all there in Ann Arbor, and I always felt like Michigan could be one of those perennial top 5 recruiting, programs that just dominate, and they just never have. So from that standpoint, I'm very curious to see what like the infusion of like a young, less weird version of Jim Harbaugh would look like. And I don't know if Michigan's recruiting results are kind of predicated on how awkward Jim Harbaugh is as a human. And I think that like even people who love Michigan can acknowledge that. And I'm very curious to see like what Chiron Moore would be able to do in that regard. But I think there's no question that the continuity of the current roster, was at stake here, because they are going to be losing some pieces, but they're also bringing some key pieces back from a national championship. I did find it kind of funny that Jim Harbaugh probably was outspoken, at least behind the scenes, about how important it would be for Chiron Moore to take over, and how important that would be for Michigan from a continuity standpoint. And then he proceeded to just raid the entire program of all the key pieces that kind of help run it. And that's kind of just like life in the big city. But
yeah, and they didn't have to go with him, right? They chose.
No.
Jesse Minter chose. Ben Herbert chose. Jay Harbaugh chose. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not like from a continuity standpoint when you ripple apart the entire roster of coaches, including the strength coach, who people have a lot of respect for, and obviously is a really good at his job, because you don't have a roster that doesn't recruit to the same Alabama-like level to win a national title if you're not doing that piece right. I think they lost quite a bit, and I think it's going to be an uphill battle for Michigan to ever, get back to this point here in the next 2 or 3 years. But I do know that, Chiron Moore was a very steadying piece to the puzzle there through pretty traumatic times. And won some pretty critical games when Jim Harbaugh was suspended, and did a very good job of like kind of steadying the ship. But running a program and having to rebuild the coaching staff and the roster is going to be a huge proposition. And somebody who's under 40 at Michigan, it's going to be an interesting thing to track for sure.
It will be indeed. Okay, more to come on the Michigan coaching staff roster situation, obviously, as we hear more about Tennessee and this ongoing investigation. Tennessee under investigation again, which is sort of its own story altogether. But we'll do our best to kind of keep tabs on that. I'm sure it'll be in the news here in the quote-unquote off-season, Dan. Should we get to the February heat check?
BTUs. I don't know if you run warm. I run warm. I'm ready to do this. Can't play more than that. We don't own the copyright.
We don't.
I was going to say in 1 second.
Yeah. Yep, that's all. That's all we got.
Incidental.
Dan, as you look through what transpired this bowl season, we've had people asking us via social media last couple of weeks, hey, you guys didn't do a big bowl recap episode. We talked about the New Year's Six. We obviously talked about the playoff and the national championship, but we've been sort of collecting some of these tidbits, these nuggets over the course of the last month or so to do an episode like this where we could just pull out the highlights and talk about the things that we just want to know. What is the BTU? What is the bowl thermal unit on some of these items that transpired during bowl season? So why don't you kick things off?
I'm gonna start with a topic that's very near and dear to Ari's heart, and my first heat check is going to be actually related to the fact that, did you know that bodies don't really decompose if they are found in a peat bog? Ty, did you know that?
A peat bog?
Like a bog, like a marshy bog. If a body is decomposing, if there's a cadaver under that bog, the peat maintains like the muscle tissue because of the acidity of the water and that oxygen
peat?
can't get in.
What is
Yes, the peat bog. And the reason I bring that up is because part of the reason is the moss keeps the body intact, keeps all of everything intact, which brings us to Miller Moss Watch, Ty.
Oh, I had that too.
I was going to say, like, I didn't know where we were going, but it sounded serial killery, and I didn't know why that was close to my heart.
For each of these. So, what is your heat check on the USC football program as they enter the Big Ten, specifically as it relates to Miller Moss throwing 6 touchdowns, an emphatic win over Louisville in USC's bowl game? Mekhi Lemon was a highlight. Zachariah Branch was a highlight. Do you think USC, now with more promise from Miller Moss than I think we expected, as they went into the portal time of year and they were looking at Will Howard, they were looking at all these guys. Do you think USC has more heat than anticipated after Miller Moss and his bowl performance? Ari Wasserman, what's your answer?
Are we 100% sure? Like, is it like just over that Miller Moss is the starter? Like,
so,
I mean,
as opposed to somebody who enters the portal in like the spring period,
so
or even
they also got
Maava
came in, so like I don't know. He was really, really good and very young, and like I just don't know if I'm ready to get on the jump to conclusions, Matt. That Miller Moss is 100% the guy. I think that like part of it is that way because they weren't overly aggressive or successful with the name brand quarterbacks in the portal, but they still did bring in a quarterback who played last year. So I don't know if that's 100% in the books, but I am very curious about USC's functionality as a program. I don't think I'm going into the offseason this year, guys, like viewing USC as a legitimate national championship contender like I might have 2 years ago or the year before. And I was very much fooled because have a high-profile wager with my friend Andy Staples that they would make the playoff in the first 3 years of the Lincoln Riley era. And that was before the 12-team expansion, so maybe I can backdoor in there and be right. But it's just been kind of terrible. Like, when you think about it, the first year was good. They were almost, half a football away from making the college football playoff. But last year's defensive breakdowns and meltdowns were just so terrible that it's hard to even take them seriously at this point as a program. Now, they went out there and they got Danton Lynn, and they restructured their defensive staff and all those things. So, like, I'm more kind of concerned with whether or not they were going to even just play functional defense next year, even more so than Miller Moss. So I think USC on the BTU is pretty high just based on the interesting nature of the program. But I feel like for the first time, and it's kind of weird to say after losing Caleb Williams, that I'm more concerned with, are we going to show competence and growth in a truly awful – I mean, honestly, I think that the Washington game last year was the worst defensive effort I've ever seen with my own two eyes. Like, ever.
Wow.
Like, am I
forgetting any? It was horrible.
Well, let's see. We've got – well, look, there was a USC assistant coach at when he was a head coach at Texas Tech, and Cliff Kingsbury fielded some pretty awful defenses there.
Yeah.
I've watched some Don Pelham and Brady Hoke defenses at Oregon that I was pretty disappointed.
What about Colorado this year? They had some moments.
Colorado had some terrible moments.
I just remember watching that Washington game thinking, there is no chance they are not scoring on this possession.
That's
true. And like they literally did every time, I think.
See,
I don't know, there might have been a stop or a turnover that I'm forgetting, but like it was just awful. All this to say that Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day even were in this position 2 years ago where they were considered two of the, if you would have had a top 7 list of best coaches in college football, both of them would probably have been into the top 7 just based on where they were, their offensive minds, and being just young, smart people. Lincoln Riley probably more deserving than Ryan Day in the sense that he made the college football playoff 3 or 4 years in a row and had all those Heisman winners. But now they're kind of both in the same position where it's like, whoa, wait a minute, did we overestimate what these guys are capable of? So like the notion of USC and whether or not he's a good enough head coach to maybe fix what seemed to be irreparable damage to the defense is far more enticing to me as like something I could chew on with some BTUs going into the offseason than whether or not Miller Moss is going to be very good, because I think we're all just anticipating it's just a major step back at quarterback no matter who gets it.
Yeah, I'm all in on Miller Moss. I'm ready. I'm pushing the chips in. Ty, have you seen USC's schedule? It's kind of okay.
It's not bad.
I was looking at it earlier.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of your moment because I think the Miller Moss watch that we started on this show was done more tongue in cheek. But then we saw him in the bowl game, and it was like, holy crap!
I'm in, Ty.
Six touchdowns against a good Louisville team. Like that's workable, right? If you need a quarterback in 2024, he might be a guy you want to look at.
I'm in. I'm just saying it now.
I'll say 7.3 out of 10 on the BTU scale. We just made that up.
I'm an 8 too.
Yeah, like I think to your point, Ari, we always expected that there was going to be a step back at quarterback, but Malachi Nelson transfers out. They bring in Jaden Mayava from UNLV. Miller Moss goes into the bowl game, obviously throws those 6 touchdowns. So that was always going to be interesting. It was just, I think, a function of who are the names going to be, because is it Will Howard? Is it somebody else? Like we didn't know. Honestly, I expected maybe that they'd be a little bit more active on the portal side of things, on at least at the quarterback position. But that kind of being its own point of intrigue, you couple that with the defense, USC's got a lot of BTUs on it. 7-3?
Just butt in here and ask
Please.
a question, guys? You mentioned something about their schedule like being manageable.
Yeah.
It's awful.
No,
what are you talking about?
No. Listen. USC opens with what still might be a catastrophic LSU defense and a new quarterback, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not an easy game by any stretch of the
does
imagination.
USC miss
yes.
both Big Ten favorites on this schedule in Ohio State and Oregon?
They do. That's right.
They get a kind of rebuilding Michigan team, right? Michigan's
on the road in their first Big Ten game ever.
It's on the road. It's a very difficult game. But all things considered, like, would you rather have got Michigan the last 2 years or this year? Of course it's this year, right? I'm just saying circumstantially, this USC schedule isn't horrible.
Road games at Michigan.
Great.
I think we have a neutral site game against LSU, and I guess those could be helmet games, to your point. They could be helmet games. But then you're also playing Wisconsin and Penn State at home. You've got to travel to Washington. You've got what could be a much better Nebraska team in there.
Will Rogers, Washington?
I understand that, but I'm just saying these are typically games that they struggle with in the Pac-12
I hear you. But
so it's not like it's like they have the entire Big Ten West for a 6-week period. Like every 2 weeks, they're playing against a team that they could conceivably lose to. And all the things that you're saying to neg the teams that we're talking about also apply to the team we're discussing.
Of course. But what I'm also saying is there's a lot of change in a lot of these places, and USC weirdly has continuity for the first time in a while.
Yep. Okay.
That's all.
Here's one. I'm not going to be as flowery in my description, Ari, but I'm just going to call out that Arizona forced 6 turnovers of Oklahoma in the Holiday Bowl and won by 14,
Alamo
38
Bowl?
to 20. What did I say? Holiday Bowl? Alamo Bowl.
Alamo, yeah.
38-24 was the final. We had all the stats from Noah Fafita and T-Mac, which I think we've come to expect at this point. But the defense stepping up in the manner that it did. Now, new coach, it's not a Jed Fish Arizona going into the 16-team Big 12. But on the topic of schedules.
Oh, my God.
Arizona's schedule in 2024.
Dream.
This isn't a
West Coast
preview show.
bias from
That's
Ty
what I thought
Hildenbrand.
you meant. Like, that's a dream schedule. I was comparing it to USC. But yes, your point was right.
This is not a preview episode, but the schedule is very front-loaded and extremely workable because first 5 weeks of the year, at Kansas State, at Utah, home against Texas Tech. There are some other landmines a little bit later on this season, or a little bit later on in the season. But all that being said, it sets up pretty well for a team that hopefully retains a fair amount of experience going into 2024. And who the hell knows where this conference shakes out with all of the change that it has to endure. So heat check, Ari, how many BTUs are you at on Arizona after the bowl with the changes going into a new conference?
I think it was like a 7.5 probably like in the midst of it, but probably now like a 3 or a 4 going out of it. And I think the reason why is just national interest. I don't know if people are as bought into that program as maybe I was with my past. And let me tell you guys, I have my head up in the clouds a lot, in this job where I'm just kind of focused on what I'm working on. And, but to have like the group chat experience where a lot of my closest friends that I went to school with there were complaining about it and me getting a front row seat to it. It was like the raw nature of how those people were feeling. When Jed Fish left was like a nice, refreshing front row seat for me of like, this really matters to people, even if you think it doesn't. So the fact that they were able to retain the 2 best players on their offense, one of which is a quarterback who showed a lot of youthful promise, and T-Mac, who I believe will probably be a first-round pick in the draft. it could have been a complete and utter dumpster fire in the sense of everything that Jedd Fisch built got torn down in a 1 week period. And he did take some things and they lost some players, but it wasn't nearly as catastrophic as it could have been. And I think that it is still possible that Arizona goes into the offseason as one of the 2 or 3 favorites to win the new Big 12. And that schedule is really, really easy. And I think it kind of, maybe I'm speaking your language here, Dan, but like for Pac-12 fans who are so used to what the Pac-12 used to look like, was kind of a bummer. They feel like, they escaped to the Big 12 before the whole thing exploded. They thought they were safe. Then you look at the schedule and it's like there's no USC and there's no UCLA, there's no Washington or Oregon. It really does kind of take the flavor out of it a little bit if you're accustomed to playing in a schedule that has those teams on it.
If you're strictly going on a BTU scale of the best and hottest quarterback receiver tandems in the country, proven quarterback receiver tandems in the country, are there 2 better? Is there 1 better? Like where right now, and like you can look at a number of schools and say like, oh, that could be interesting, right? DJU to Florida State's guys, or Dylan Gabriel to Evan Stewart or whatever. But when you look at like the proven nature of Noah Fafita and T-Mac, like that's 10 out of 10.
And together too.
That's what I'm
even
saying.
Those combinations,
Tandem BTU heat from quarterback to receiver, I think is one of the best 3 in the country, if not even better.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. 100%.
Okay. You ready for my next BTU heat check, Ty? Do you have a number?
I am.
For Arizona? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was one of the things that I want to call out, and I think it was your colleague Stu Mandel in his way too early top 25 Ari had
Which
Arizona
one?
as like a top 15 team. I was like, whoa, okay, USC not ranked, Arizona up there, but you get it. And provided they can retain some of the talent, and that doesn't change, I guess there's still time.
What Jedd Fisch did was actually bring players in there for the first time ever.
Yeah.
Like Arizona, it wasn't a miracle job. They got top 50 players in recruiting who came in and actually hit, and they were the types of talents that Arizona just never had in the past, and they're still there going into a weaker schedule with a new coach that people have a lot of respect for. So I think they could make some noise.
I think I'm like a 5.7, if only because
I don't think the
like
Big
the
12
talent.
has a lot of BTUs in this moment.
No, well, I like the talent that Arizona brings back.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting situation going into a new conference, and I think it's especially intriguing that a school in Arizona that, for, let's be honest, a while was kind of a doormat, now has built up with a coach that has since left, goes into a new conference, and suddenly is one of maybe 3 favorites. That's interesting. If nothing more, preseason, again, not a preview show, but that's pretty damn interesting to me. So I'll go 5.
Yeah, and they could make the playoff, right? I mean, just saying that sentence is exciting. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Dan, go ahead.
All right. My next one is, well, in just looking at this one, I learned that bears happen to be very good swimmers and rely on finding brooks and bodies of water to cool down. They can shed their underfur as well as, they try to deal with the heat. And I learned that because there might not be a higher level BTU situation than what's happening in Oxford, Mississippi. Bringing the players that they brought back, minus Quinshon Judkins, bringing the players that they brought in, Juice Wells, Walter Nolan, guys like that. Right now, in terms of where the SEC is, in terms of where there is new hype, right? Texas has been developing hype. Georgia has been maintaining hype. Alabama has lost hype. Texas A&M starting over again. LSU's a wild card. Ole Miss has kind of proven BTUs, and I think it was sort of emphasized with their win over Penn State in the bowl game. Even with the Penn State defensive players who weren't there, Ole Miss looked good. They looked confident. They looked prepared. They looked enthusiastic, which is not always the case for even good teams in bowl season. I'm feeling a lot of the BTUs with Ole Miss right now. What say you, Ty and Ari?
I mean, we talked about Ole Miss a couple episodes ago, and we did our portal eval, and if they don't make the playoff, it's kind of a failure.
Yeah.
You got to make the playoff with this roster. Now I'm looking at the schedule. The schedule may beg to differ. The deeper you go into this thing, I think the harder it gets. At LSU, they've got Oklahoma on this slate. They've got Georgia on this slate. They've got Florida on this slate to close things out. Who knows what state Florida will be in by that point in the season.
I might.
Well, I have a pretty good idea at this point, but I don't want to draw too many conclusions. Sure. Again, it's still January at time of recording. first half of this thing works out really well. Back half definitely toughens up in a pretty significant way. So, look, they've got the ammo on board to make the playoff. They should make the playoff if Lane Kiffin is halfway as good of a coach as we would expect. So I think there's a lot of heat coming off of Ole Miss as well. You know, it's going to be one of those interesting scenarios, I think, in the SEC, just because suddenly we've got this vacuum. Nick Saban is gone.
Yeah.
Right? He drove all the other programs crazy trying to match him, and now he's gone, and now suddenly who is going to step up and kind of fill that void if not Georgia?
Yeah.
I think Ole Miss wants to be that team. They fashioned themselves a playoff roster. We'll see if they can do it.
Where were like nuclear and hydrogen bomb tests? The atolls, the small islands that were completely. That's what I have BTU wise with Ole Miss. I have atoll level BTUs.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm like an 8-1.
Yeah. I'm 9-7.
When you said it, my first thought was in the 9s.
Yeah.
I'm more leaning towards Dan on this one because, well, I mean, 8's good too, right? Like, I think that things in college football become more interesting when you start like zooming out a little bit and not necessarily just on how good is Ole Miss going to be, but the case study of what Ole Miss could do in terms of a roster building strategy. Like the notion of returning 10 players, or a bunch of players from a 10-win team the previous year, looking at the schedule and saying, hey, well, we don't play Alabama. We don't have to play Georgia till mid-November. We could really, really do something here. So why don't we take all of our money and allocate the resources in order to try to build the best roster that we can and just literally go for it. Like buying at the trade deadline and creating this notion of like, hey, you know, when the opportunity strikes, we might not be big NIL players every year, or we might not be able to load a roster this way, but when circumstance and schedule and roster all match up the year before and you see that window, are we going to see teams go on a spending spree or a resource spree the year before and then go all into a season? Like, so the notion of all in to me is very fascinating. Ole Miss is coming into the season with a playoff, and not just a playoff appearance. I think win a few games in the playoff even. That's what the expectation is. And even without Judkins on the roster, the players that they brought in, you know, put them in a position where they should be able to do so, especially considering the fact their schedule is very manageable for it being in the new SEC. I don't see Alabama or Texas on the schedule. So not only will Ole Miss make the playoff, or how many games can it lose and still make the playoff, and will it make a playoff game, is Ole Miss going to be the new blueprint for how middle-tier programs dying to win big actually approach their roster building in the future. Is fascinating.
Ty, you watched the bowl game closely. And
I did.
Mentioned the defensive players that were out. Was there anything in that specific bowl game where you're like, I think this can continue, especially given the players that they added?
No, I mean, most of my hot takes are on the Penn State side. You know,
okay,
that's right. Most of my hot takes are on that side. We expected that Ole Miss was going to come in there and was going to look good on offense. I don't know if I quite expected they'd look as good as they did throwing the football.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of my point of contention with that game. But Penn State was without some guys, and look, we've talked ad nauseum about their problems on offense, and a lot of that stuff still kind of was there. So, yeah, I'm excited about Ole Miss. I'm excited to see what they look like and how they fit kind of in the pecking order in this new SEC, the Saban-less SEC that I'm sure we're going to be blue in the face talking about all offseason long.
Are you seeing a black bear in public?
No, but I've been to the Black Bear Diner.
What? Where's the Black Bear Diner?
It's kind of like, I think it's like a Southwestern diner chain. Very good.
It's a chain. Okay, I've never been. Never heard of it.
Yeah. It's I've seen it in mountain towns.
Ty, have you seen a black bear in the
seen
rolling hills of PA?
I have, yeah.
Oh, okay. I saw one in Canada once. It was far away.
Editor's number one irrational fear in life is encountering a bear in public.
Bears, yeah.
And it's so irrational that like he will avoid hiking trails and stuff because he can't. And I find that to be very funny, just like picturing him actually being chased by a bear, because like the odds of that actually happening are very, very slim.
Yep.
But you know, just like I have a friend who's afraid to go on cruises because he's afraid of pirates. Like that's another one.
Oh, pirates! Not even falling off.
Yeah. And I was like, and he said the word Gatling gun, and I've never in my entire life laughed harder than that, because like and he's not joking.
In reference to
a grappling gun or a grappling hook, where just like.
Those are two very different things. A Gatling gun and a grappling hook.
It's both.
So he would
Yeah.
only go on a cruise if it were equipped with grappling hooks?
He's afraid that they are going to use the grappling hook
hooks
to go on board with
board.
machine guns. Yes, while
gotta
he's on the
believe-
cruise.
I gotta believe that Carnival has heard about the elephant hoses that you can use to sort of
Yeah, that's
ward
true.
off the pirates.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, a 35-year-old man being afraid of that is a very funny
Tremendous.
thing to think about.
not falling
Yeah, and
overboard, not like
drowning, not the
entire-
Titanic.
the cruise ship coming down with some sort of bacterial infection or something that spreads quickly. It's much more
Pirates.
the threat of pirates, even off like British Columbia, if you were to take
Right.
an Alaskan cruise.
I mean, we've been reading
And how
about the
common
orcas.
are they? Are there pirates out there? Like,
You don't
how
hear about
common
them
are-
anymore that much with cruises.
It's just orcas now, man.
Yeah, the orcas.
But is pirating in the ocean an industry still?
I assume
think so.
so. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think it's
Yeah.
very specific to like certain areas of the Indian Ocean. I think that's where it's been most prevalent, and I
And they're
don't
just
Horn of
stealing like
Africa,
from
that
cargo
region,
ships.
And I don't think they target cruises that much, though. Maybe I'm wrong. It's usually cargo ships, I thought.
Okay.
Your editor took Captain Phillips, the movie, very seriously.
That's great, though.
No, the editor was the bear. My other
Editor is
friend.
bears.
who's-
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
This is his friends.
either way, they're both
Yeah.
adults. So
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair
Ty,
enough.
what's
All
your
right.
next heat check?
I've got a two-way heat check here.
I'm ready.
Centered around the Pinstripe Bowl, fellas. The Pinstripe Bowl. Rutgers beat Miami in the Pinstripe Bowl, 31-24. The Rutgers schedule. We're talking a lot about schedules here again. Episode not a
Yeah,
preview.
I don't think there's any heat on Rutgers, but you can continue. There's heat on Greg Schiano's bank account, and that's good.
There's heat on Shiano's bank account, but there should be at least a little bit of heat on Rutgers because of the schedule. The schedule to me is fascinating. It is like a total 180 from where it's been, right? We're accustomed to Rutgers playing Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. This season, they play none of them. They play none
No
of
Big Ten East powers.
none of those teams. They do have to travel to USC. They, I think, get UCLA and USC back-to-back weeks. It's still Rutgers. Okay, I don't mean that as a pejorative, but they're still trying to like build this thing up. But in the new Big Ten, Rutgers recruiting class relative to newcomer Washington was like 0.78 points worse. So pretty close to
In the
where
vicinity.
Washington was.
Well, I don't think
And-
Washington has a recruiting class anymore.
No.
So that might be
and-
like dividing something by zero. Continue.
and should be a lot more experienced than they've been in the past. They, I think, return a fair amount on their defense as well. Kyle Monangai, their big running back, is coming back for another season. So this is not to say that Rutgers is going to be in contention for the Big Ten, but looking at the schedule, I say, okay, maybe a little bit of heat there. On the flip side, Miami. I don't know what to make of Miami, guys. I have no idea what to make out of the Miami Hurricanes.
Miami is almost an Ari Wasserman petri dish, right? It's the extent to which Ari will stand by like his ethos, because this is a Miami team that recruits really well.
Stars matter,
The
right?
roster is talented, and they're a situation where you're like, at a certain point, it's got to matter. But then you also see how they lose games. You see how they go into games, how they're unprepared for games, and you're just like, well, maybe stars don't matter in the way they do. Maybe Miami is like a very specific test, specific to Ari Wasserman.
when Mario Cristobal left Oregon
Mm-hmm.
and you were able to like watch that last 30-second clip, if I could have just showed it to you then, would you have just been tickled pink?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
The thing about the Petri
Except he
dish
won
is-
the conference and won a Rose Bowl at Oregon.
Yeah. The Petri dish thing is funny because it exploded in my face when Michigan won the national title.
Right, true.
But also, too, Miami isn't the first case of recruited really well and never as good either.
Right.
My thought process when it comes to the recruiting thing is that having a X number of players or a certain number of talent on your roster is a prereq to winning a national championship, but it doesn't guarantee being good. It guarantees that you won't win one if you don't. So that, to me, even is now kind of in question after what Michigan was able to do and what Washington might have been able to do had they won that game. So Miami is always interesting to me because every single year when they sign these crazy good recruiting classes, you always think to yourself, like, is it finally going to happen? You know, is it finally going to happen? And at a certain point, if because they've done a really good job, and what Mario did at Oregon was bolster the lines, and in the ACC, that's a really good thing. Like, I think that they've gotten a lot of good line talent in both the portal and in the recruiting ranks. So I am always on high alert for Miami just showing up and being good out of nowhere. Not out of nowhere, but being good and better than we expect as a result of some of these players kind of growing up and having a good offseason and Mario coaching well. So that's always the case. But if they just stink again, like that's just going to be status quo. And as it pertains to Rutgers, like if they won 9 games next year, if everything you said, Ty, comes true and they like win 9 games, like because like they won 7 this year and I don't think anyone noticed. So like if they win 9, like what would it take for people to notice Rutgers?
It's who you beat. It's who you beat and how you beat them, because they were just sort of boa constrictors last year when they were competitive. But they weren't flashy. They didn't upset anybody big. They just chipped away in a pretty down conference. So,
but when they did beat Miami, people did notice that.
People did notice. Miami, to me, BTU-wise, is like an 8-3, just because I'm prepared for anything any given week with Miami now that they've added Cam Ward, who's like the ultimate wild card. The best of Cam Ward is crazy impressive, and then he'll just disappear randomly in late October, early November for 2.5 weeks. So I'm fully ready for Miami to like demolish Florida State and lose to a new Duke, or I don't have their schedule in front of me. But the heat wise, they are going to be incredible to watch. They're going to be the most entertaining team in the country to me, because quarter to quarter, half to half, week to week, I think they're going to be like 6 different teams.
They open up in August 31st. I think that's a week 0 game at Florida. And if they win that game, like Miami could legitimately get to 6 or 7-0. They play Florida A&M, Ball State, South Florida, Vatech. Oh, I learned this week you can't say Vatech. It's VT. I heard that's offensive. I don't know if you guys knew that. I didn't.
Yeah.
At Cal, and then at Louisville, who I think is going to be pretty good too, and then Florida State in late October. But they have a chance to do that. And if they won the ACC, it wouldn't be surprising, would it? It would just be like, oh, it finally happened.
It would be surprising, because if you look at the math, doing it once in 24 years is a pretty low percentage.
But like Florida State was kind of surprising to me last year.
Really?
Like when Florida State showed, well, I mean, when you look at the roster and the players that they had, like Jared Verse and Keon Coleman and Jordan Travis and all the Johnny Wilson and Benson, all the guys they had, it always added up to that. But it had been so long since we saw Florida State be so awesome, it kind of got into that no man's land of, is this magic lost? Are they going to be able to do it again? And then they finally did it again. It was kind of like, wow, they actually not only just beat the crap out of LSU on national television, but they did finish their season unbeaten. And like, I'm with you, Dan. I don't know, like if they beat Florida, I don't know that necessarily means that Miami is back. So if Miami were to end up doing it, it would be surprising, but the pieces at the end of the run, much like Florida State, it would make sense if they did.
Yeah. What is the BTU ranking on both these teams? I'm assuming Miami is higher, but it was of note that they played each other, and of course that Rutgers won in the bowl game.
I have a 3-1 Rutgers, 3.1 for Rutgers, 8.3 for Miami. Yeah.
Cam Ward brings Miami up probably into the 7.3 for me.
Okay.
Rutgers is pretty low, but that doesn't mean, I think Rutgers maybe like 2.8.
Yeah.
Just because of all the emerging storylines in the Big Ten. I don't know if that's one that people are going to get amped about. That said, it's not too long ago that Rutgers was a complete dumpster fire of a program that shouldn't even be, like, people were making fun of their inclusion in the conference. And like Greg Schiano was probably the only coach on the face of the earth that truly understood like how to make Rutgers at least like semi-competent. And he speaks the language, and every single high school coach in New Jersey loves that guy.
True.
And like the fact that their like win total next year might be like over under 7.5 or 6.5.
It's crazy.
I don't care what their schedule is. The fact that he was able to accomplish that is a hat tip to Greg Schiano for doing it, and being willing to do it.
Ari, if out of the shadows emerged a billionaire booster at Rutgers, and he or she decided,
boss? Is that what you're?
The cake boss. Let's assume it's the cake boss. I don't know.
Yeah.
If the cake boss suddenly finds $2 billion of discretionary income, how much of that money would the cake boss need to put into the Rutgers NIL infrastructure, what have you, in order to turn Rutgers into an immediate playoff contender?
Can I guys tell you like what I've always thought though about Rutgers before I answer that? I always thought if they were New Jersey State that they would be better. I think they've got a branding problem.
Issue. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't like. I don't even know what it means. Like someone's name, right?
I assume
Rutgers.
so.
So like if they were New Jersey State and they had like a really cool, maybe even if they were still the Knights, and they had a really like black and red uniforms that had like the outline of the state on the thing, and people like acknowledged and knew where it was, and made it, they would have a chance to make it cool. I just don't know if you can make the name Rutgers cool.
It was originally named Queens College.
Okay.
And it was renamed Rutgers College after Colonel Henry Rutgers in 1825. He was a Revolutionary War hero and the son of colonists from the Netherlands. There you go.
That's good to hear.
History lesson on the day.
And that was way before the birthplace of college football.
Which they were there for.
Yeah, they were there for it. So I don't know. I think that if you took $20 million, you could make a really good roster anywhere. Because, I mean, I guess like also too, if Greg Schiano's still the head coach, he was an NFL head coach. He was a coordinator at Ohio State. He's got a pretty extensive resume of working with football players. It wouldn't be like a joke of an institution to like be like, hey, go play there. Right. And I think money talks. I think people would go play anywhere if you threw enough money at it. I think, you see a lot of bogus NIL dollars flying around there, but they won 7 games with what I assume is close to nothing. Or not anywhere near what other teams that are in the Big Ten were paying.
Right.
If you maybe turned it to 20 or 25, I think you could make the playoff pretty convincingly at that point. That would be my number.
We talked on a previous episode about perhaps that method for a G5 school because, of course, as you know, group of 5 team gets in the playoff, and if a G5 team finds a rich booster that's willing to spend a lot of money, is that not the path of least resistance? It might take a bit to convince people to come there, but if money talks, as you say it does, and of course, if you could put together an interesting G5 team that wins all its games, that seemingly is an easy way into the playoff with perhaps a lot of visibility for the school.
Well, the question I have for you guys, and I don't know the answer to this, I mean, you went to a school, Dan, that's got some pretty wealthy people around it. Mm-hmm. Why has no billionaire, like football-obsessed billionaire, just like gone scorched earth yet? Like you would think that like, because like when you think about how much money a billionaire has, or like what Nike is worth,
right, or
what Apple is worth, like Tim Cook and Auburn, like if you really, really, really felt like $1 billion is like putting together a top 3 class is a drop in the bucket of $1 billion.
Right.
Like why has nobody? Do you think it will ever get to a point where like a T. Boone Pickens, God rest his soul, decides I'm 83 years old, I've got billions of dollars, the last thing I want is my team to win a national championship, and then actually just like pays every single member of their class $5 million to come there? Like
my guess is there's something in the optics of it, right? That you're spending so much money on something that's seen like internationally as pretty frivolous, even though we love it. We're like, they spent how much money so that they could win 3 more football games when that money could have fed 300 million people, right? That's when they're in the spotlight like that. And I think Phil Knight might be a little bit different because he made his money in sports. So maybe there's a difference. And also,
it would be the easiest thing for him to do too.
Right.
I would say, if I were Phil Knight, I would say if you're a top 100 player in the country in the 247 Sports Composite, and you come to Oregon, I automatically give you a 10-year Nike deal.
Right.
And X number of dollars, whatever that comes out to be, and it actually could be kind of used in the same vein that NIL was intended for, which is you are a Nike athlete, you wear Nike clothes, you post Nike things on your Instagram, you tweet about Nike and links to sales on your thing, and you're actually an ambassador for the brand that exists right there. Like, why don't they do that?
I think the Oregon difference is at this point over the last 20 or 30 years is it's been a proven place that develops NFL players, that wins a ton of games. So I think money gets players in the door. But like you're saying, like why doesn't a billionaire at Iowa State or Minnesota or something spend $40 million? That's fine, but you can make a bunch of money going there. But if you're thinking even medium term, are you going to become a better football player? Like what are your odds of becoming an NFL quarterback if you go to Minnesota or Iowa State, as Iowa State has an NFL quarterback starting in the Super Bowl?
That's not the great example
but
right
I'm
now,
saying,
Dan.
But the track record specific to those schools, right? That like. It's one thing to get players there. It's another to say, okay, now that you're here, we're going to develop you into an NFL, top.
But if a billionaire became maniacal about it,
right,
he could also hire a new staff.
Can hire the new staff. Can hire the new facilities. I just think it takes time. I just think it takes time to build out that infrastructure, and it takes commitment, not just financial commitment, but like. It takes your time, right? You need to convince coaches that this is the place for you. You need to build out like the NIL infrastructure of like how the deals are going to work and hire a bunch of lawyers. Like it takes a good amount of your time. I don't think it's like a turnkey, write a check, succeed kind of thing.
right.
Tim Cook makes $83 million a year.
Great.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And Auburn has infrastructure.
But
Okay,
Auburn has
sorry.
had money forever. Okay, I'll use that as a cue and talk about a G5 school that has a mascot that actually has some fertility issues when it gets hot and stressed out. I'm going to talk about the G5 school that finished with the highest recruiting composite rank and emphatically won a bowl game. That would be the USF Bulls. How about that, Ari? How about that for a transition?
So when they're very hot, they have a hard time reproducing?
When they get very hot over the summer, bulls get very stressed out, and the fertility issues start to grow.
Okay.
Like bull semen, according to VitaFirm, which is a company that makes mineral-rich vitamins for bulls to keep their stress levels down. Not a sponsor, I suppose, could be. If VitaFirm wants to come through with a bag for the Solid Verbal.
Solid Verbal sponsored by VitaFirm.
Apparently bulls need a mineral-rich diet in the summer months to keep their stress levels down. That helps with fertility. USF, though, absolutely demolishes, I believe, Syracuse, right?
Yeah.
45-0, Alex Golesh, first year as head coach. Bring in a couple of notable transfers, not a huge transfer class. I don't think the win and final score means a ton at the moment because of what Syracuse was going through in an interim situation. But USF has a lot of work to do on defense. Had a promising, 2.5, 3 quarters against Alabama early on in the year, but certainly took some lumps on defense. But there seems to be a good amount of heat. Alex Golesh getting in front of microphones, talking a big game, which I love. USF, obviously, geographically in a good place. Schedule looks pretty decent moving forward. What is the heat and BTU level with USF in this moment?
I'm still trying to shake off the words bull semen.
Yeah, of course. You'd be amazed at how often it comes up on this show. Continue.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a really funny sponsorship too.
Yeah.
And the thing that I think about too, sorry, I'll get to your question in a second, but somebody is a millionaire because of those vitamins. You ever think about how awesome it is, these people who come up with these obscure ideas that nobody in regular modern society would ever think of, who now have a house in Laguna Beach because they came up with bull vitamins.
He is the bull semen king.
Bull semen king of Chicago. Yeah.
Of Chicago.
Yeah. That's, I think that I
think
BTUs,
it's more Texas that has the issues with the heat and the
it's
cattle.
the bull.
Yeah.
Okay. Why are we worried about bull anxiety again? What's the actual
USF? They're the bulls.
I know.
It's
But
heat, right? The heat causes the stress, and this is the heat.
I think
episode.
that's an incredible fact. I just mean, why are humans concerned with the stress level of bulls in real life?
Because they make money off of the cattle.
Yeah.
Come on, Ari. You're a Texan.
Yeah, I am not a Texan. I live in
Okay.
Texas, but I'm not. I haven't been indoctrinated yet.
Okay.
I mean, considering the fact that UCF was one of the worst teams in college football
SF.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
What did I
USF.
say?
You
CF?
said CF. Yeah,
USF. Sorry. I think they lost all but one game in 2022. To me, I could probably get to a 2.4 on this, just because I think that every program in Florida. I don't think that any program located in Florida should ever stink under any circumstance. So the fact that they have some momentum, again, you can't take a 45-0 win over Syracuse, considering what happened there, overly serious. But what you can do is you can see a nice, tangible piece of growth there that can continue on into the following year. And I'm old enough to remember when USF went 10-0 that one year. I think it was 08 or 07. When
they got killed by Oregon in the Sun Bowl, but that was the fun year.
But they had a really fun year, and I think that everybody in Florida, with the proximity to talent that they have, is entitled to at least one fun year every 6-7 years. And I think that goes back to how weird it is that Miami's been not very good for as long as they have. So yes, I mean, I think I could put it up there with next to Rutgers in terms of BTUs.
I have it above Rutgers because of the location in Florida, because of the juice, because of the recruiting. Young promising quarterback Byron Brown. I'm there. I'd like a 5-4 for USF right now.
5-4.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
especially with the bull fertility element of this all.
Yeah, well, maybe
bull,
you're just I know you're just
gotta
hot
adjust
right now.
my
Yeah.
seat. Yeah.
The bull thing, that was unexpected, Dan. I'm not going to lie.
Was it though, Ty? After all these years,
Maybe not.
Okay.
Maybe not as unexpected as people who are new listeners would expect me to say.
Yeah.
I'm not higher than Rutgers. I don't think I gave my number for Rutgers. I'm like a 5.3
Oh, wow. Okay.
on Rutgers. Yeah, I'm
That's
just
how you
interested.
prove to the people that you're just a big college football guy. You know, like you don't care about titles.
I live in this part of the world, so maybe I'm a little bit more interested. For me, the USF thing, it's more of a bigger picture heat check because they're building the stadium, and I wrote about it a lot in our newsletter that we sent out towards, I guess, the fall of last year. There was some strife there with, do we actually want to build a $340 million stadium at the risk of leaving academics behind? And they said, yes, let's do it. We're going for it. We need to, some of the rationale behind that decision was we don't want to be left behind in the football world. Like we see that we're in Florida. We see where this thing could go. It's a brave new world in college football. And so we're going to build the stadium. It's going to open in 2026. It's going to have a big freaking bowl. Dan, I don't know if it's going to be sponsored by VitaFirm. Maybe it could be.
Of course. Jeez, the amount of VitaFirm exposure on this episode. Yeah.
So much. They're going to have a big old bull, at least in the renderings, on one half of the stadium. And so I just think there is a lot of heat there on that program.
The first two FBS programs that South Florida plays this fall, Alabama and Miami.
Yep.
I'm just saying, you buy low now, the heat's going to be through the roof if anything crazy happens.
The heat's going to be through the roof, and they want to get into a power conference.
That's
They're
true.
making these investments because they want to try and pave their way into the playoff at some point in the foreseeable future. And so that's why they're investing as heavily as they are. As for what USF looks like this year, I agree on the quarterback thing. Not a preview episode. I need some time with that one. But I think overall the momentum around the program is there. And so that makes it interesting. Not more interesting than Rutgers. But I'll go 5-1. How's that?
That's pretty good. Dan, you guys saved like VitaFirm. I went and I looked up their I looked up their market cap. It's a publicly traded company called Vital Farms. And it is down like 80% in market cap the last 5 years. So here we come to save the day.
I think Vital Farms is different. I think that's a different company.
I thought Vital Farms I looked up was the owner of VitaFirm.
No, they've got the eggs. I buy their eggs. And they've been a sponsor on this show. But I think VitaFirm's different. Could be wrong.
Okay.
But
I thought that Vital Farms, I was just reading, owns VitaFirm. But
okay. I could be wrong. I need to check on my own. But
what's your next heat check, Ty? I don't know how much time. Got time for a couple more?
Kyron Drones.
Ooh, specific.
Kyron Drones. So Kyron Drones, Baylor transfer, is quarterback at VT, Virginia Tech. Ari, is that right?
That's right.
Tech. Don't say Louisiana Lafayette.
VT.
Don't do it. Yeah.
Came on strong last half of the season. Won the Military Bowl. Beat Tulane, a good group of 5 team in its own right. I think finished in his last 5 games with something like an 11-2 touchdown interception ratio. With the exception of the Louisville game.
Yeah, Louisville.
He did at least one good thing in all of the final 5 games.
Okay.
Right? Whether running or passing. The schedule next season, speaking of beautiful schedules, is beautiful. It works out really well for Virginia Tech. They're at Miami. They're at Syracuse. They're home against Clemson. So there's some name brand teams on that schedule, but this is a team to me that felt like it very much got its act together and was trending up in a good way when we last left them at the end of the season. So that's not to say this is a 9-win Virginia Tech team, but I do think after a first season for the new coaching staff trying to figure out who is going to play where, a lot of like positional changes, which was concerning. Last season, it seems as if they put things together in a really substantial way. And now going into 2024 with a good schedule and I think a lot more experience coming back, I don't know, like I'm pretty high on Brent Pry and where he's got that program pointed.
I think that's right. I'm okay with this. What number do you have for Kyron Drones?
6'2".
6'2". Okay.
Yeah, I think we saw flashes in limited action at Baylor. And when you and I remembered that he was on the roster for Virginia Tech, and then when he started playing, it was like a couple weeks into the year, we got more regular time. It was like, okay, this could be interesting to follow. And then they went to a bowl and then they won the bowl. And now I'm talking myself into Virginia Tech in a way that
They lost to your
expect.
precious Rutgers Scarlet Knights early.
This is true.
But yeah.
This is true. And they play again next year.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty high on them.
Yeah, the second half of the year, more so than the bowl to me, was what I think upped the BTUs in January, February. So yeah, I'd have them mid-tier BTU in I think a conference still desperate to get a little hot when the SEC and Big Ten seem to have all the juice right now. So yeah, Virginia Tech has a fun home field. The schedule, as you mentioned, looks nice. A younger head coach who seems to have an upward trajectory. Kyron Drones is fun. Yeah, I don't know what the receiver room looks like. I don't know what the offensive line room looks like in this moment. That's an August conversation. But in terms of like where they stack up in terms of just general vibes right now, yeah, I would say they run pretty high.
The most important thing for Virginia Tech is not the number. It is not whether we're at a 6.2 or a 6.3 or a 4.1.
That they're just on this show at all?
The fact that they're on the show is important, but the fact that if we were to have done this show a year ago, that BTU number is definitely a tick up than it was a year ago. And that's all you want, right? If you're starting over in the way that Virginia Tech was starting over with that roster, the fact that that number is objectively higher on this episode is meaningful.
I'm no expert on Virginia Tech's roster numbers right now, but it is funny that you mentioned this, Ty, because on our show we had somebody call in and say, why don't you guys talk about Virginia Tech? I've heard Ari say that this is a dead program. And if you actually look at their schedule in drones next year, there's a legitimate chance with the returning production that we have that we can make the playoff. And I kind of looked into it a little bit, and I saw their schedule before the show, and I kind of put two and two together. I'm like, well, Drones is somebody that I, too, also noticed at Baylor. I know that he wasn't always a starter there, but there were spot starts a few years ago where he came in and did some things that are like, oh, this guy's got a flash of athleticism here that could be special. And if you get a quarterback that kind of figures it out and you have a lot of returning production plus a favorable schedule, there is a chance that Virginia Tech could go win 9 games and move that BTU meter up. I'm higher than you. I think I'm closer to 7, maybe 6-8 on this, because I'm always excited about like what new can happen. And as we found out this past year, like new teams pop up all the time.
Yeah.
That is an exciting proposition for me. The thing I don't understand is, and I remember vividly when I was covering Ohio State, we went to Blacksburg for the 2015 game. That was the Braxton Miller spin move game, if you guys remember.
Yeah.
And I remember writing a huge feature before that game about like what happened to Virginia Tech. Like, why don't they recruit the DMV anymore the way that they used to? Why don't they get play? Like, if Michael Vick was born now or was 18 now, he never would go to Virginia Tech the way he could have gone. And I think it's kind of a sad story that like one of the name brand places that was competing for national championships when we were kids kind of just like went into no man's land and stopped recruiting. They weren't a factor in their own territory anymore. And, Penn State was eating up a lot of the best players in the DMV area. And like VT wasn't really even I've been saying VTech for 20 years now. It's going to take a minute for me to get out of that habit.
They're probably they're one of the big losers of national recruiting, right? That they are close enough to interesting talent, but now everybody can watch YouTube, everybody can watch Huddle, everybody can look at Max Preps or whatever, wherever tape is, that everybody can get to regional clinics and camps and everything like that, where that it's cooler if you're a top player in Virginia to go to Alabama or Penn State or any of these places.
Has anybody been a victim of that more than Virginia Tech, though? Like, I'm just trying to think of, like, which teams used to be high. Like, if you think about the Virginia Tech
USC's recruiting ground has been rated pretty significantly, right?
It has been, but they haven't dropped from, like, top 15 program in America to, like, in the 70s.
True.
Like, it's like Virginia Tech has been pillaged to the point where it's, like, not even visible or similar to what they were. I mean, they were once one of the top 15 programs in America, and now they can't. They just signed a top 40 class for the first time in a few years and finished a few years, I think, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So
people might argue Miami over the last 20 years, since they were very strong, that Miami has sort of come down as local talent has been able to explore the opportunity to go elsewhere. Yeah.
I just can't even remember the last time Virginia Tech played in a nationally relevant football game.
Virginia Tech, well, look, they beat Ohio State in the year 14. That Ohio State, so it's 2014. Yep. They had an interesting stretch with Gerard Evans. It's 2016? Is that Fuente's first year? The JC transfer, who probably should have stayed. So I guess it's really been 2016 since they were playing in.
So we're getting on a decade now.
Yeah, we're getting on a couple of president. Okay, here's my final, and there's good continuity here. Here's my final heat check, my final BTU. And actually, the phrase I'm going to use here was in Ty's vows. Quivering muscle fibers. Quivering muscle fibers are how this animal stays warm. You might think to yourself, it's a bee. Technically, it's a wasp because a yellow jacket is a wasp. Okay. Also, fun fact about wasps is a female decomposes in every fig that exists. Did you know that?
A female in every fig.
In every single fig that exists, there are the broken down proteins of a female wasp.
How on God's green earth did you find that?
I don't know. I just found that out one time that figs are dead wasp fruit. And it stuck with me.
Wait, do they go into the fruit as it's blooming and then die?
As it's blooming and die, and the wasp carcass breaks down into a protein that's within the
that
fig.
Allows it to continue to grow to what a fig turns into be?
Correct.
So if a bee doesn't die in the fig, then it can't be a fig. Or a wasp, excuse me. Then it can't be a fig?
I believe so.
Okay.
You can look it up. I can be fact-checked. I'm wrong continuously. But the fact of the matter is, Georgia Tech had a nice win over, I believe, UCF in their bowl game, and became kind of a wild card last year. Haynes King threw far too many picks, but made a ton of plays. They were probably an average, even below average defense away from beating Bowling Green opened the season with a win over Louisville. The offense certainly did enough in that game. They get the win over Miami. They make changes, much needed changes on their defensive coaching staff. They hire a longtime Mike Elko guy, Tyler Santucci, to run the defense. He was at Notre Dame, Wake Forest, Texas A&M, Duke. Edgerrin Cooper is now going to be a top 20 pick. He was one of his linebackers at Texas A&M. So I know it's easy to be seduced by the ceiling of recent Orange Bowl champion Georgia Tech. They've had some down years, but in terms of heat check, in terms of BTUs, in terms of vibes in this ACC, another Tech, I don't know. I think they're pointed in the right direction. I think there's some flames here.
The problem with Georgia Tech, I agree.
Schedule is an F minus. This
I was going to say there is we have to talk about the delta. Yeah. All right. If we want to get scientific, we have to talk about the difference in the BTUs around the program.
Yeah.
And the trajectory and the vibes BTUs versus what I think is reality next season. Because I'm looking at the schedule now. They open with Florida State. They're also on the road at North Carolina, at Louisville. They're home against Notre Dame. They're home against Miami. They play NC State. I don't know what NC State's going to look like. They close out the season on the road at Georgia, who, by the way, should still be pretty good. So ceiling there could be 7 wins. Could be 7 wins with that schedule. Again, not a preview episode, but it seems like that's pretty difficult. I feel really good about where the program is at, though. And I think we alluded to this frequently when we talked about Brent Key taking over that program as a whole. It just felt like they played for him. You know, they were in games, and that carried through to this season as well. They beat UCF in the Gasparilla Bowl. They got to 7 wins. That's a huge deal. Because, again, they had a pretty tough schedule this season. The fact that they got to the bowl, that they won the 7th game, I think is meaningful. They should have a very experienced team, again, in 2024. So that in and of itself, against a tough schedule, who knows how things shake out. Maybe they pull an upset or two and make things a little bit more interesting. But that is my cap on the BTU meter. I can't go higher than a 5.5 on Georgia Tech, if only because I look at the schedule and we have to be somewhat realist in our analysis here. So I like them. I like where they're at. I like Brent Key. I like Haynes King, but I don't see them even if everything goes right, they're not going better than 7-5.
Okay. Can I ask you a weird question because it's late January, early February as we record this?
Is it bull semen?
No, nothing related to cattle and reproduction. When you look at the roster of ACC quarterbacks, I'm not going to declare Haynes King the alpha atop this list. I'm not going to go as far as doing that. But who is? Right? You look at this list and it's is it DJU? Is it Cade Klubnik? Is it Max Johnson at North Carolina? Who
Malik
actually
Murphy at Duke?
Is it whatever maybe it's Cam Ward at Miami?
Who would you pick?
Right. That's
if
what
you
I'm
had
saying.
1 year. I think I know who I would take.
Like, Haynes King put up a lot of interesting numbers. Obviously, one of them was 16 or so interceptions. But he ran well. He was a gamer at the end of game. Like, he made plays. I don't know if Miami's going to start.
Alabama.
He's beaten Alabama. Well,
Yep.
No, that was Zach Calzada, wasn't it?
Oh, Zach Calzada, yeah. And is he not starting in the ACC? Because I feel like every former Texas A&M quarterback is a starting quarterback now on that roster. Sorry for getting those confused.
And I don't know what's going to happen with was it Albany's quarterback?
Haynes King was injured. Yeah.
Albany's quarterback transferred to Miami. Skeeter McDuffie, whatever his name is.
Yeah.
I think it's something different. But
I'm buying stock in Malik Murphy. Sorry.
Oh, Malik Murphy at Duke? Sure. So
Yeah,
who
I'm
is
buying
that your
stock.
answer? Who is the number one?
I don't know if that's who I would. If I could build my entire team, like these are two, like who would I take as like the best finished product right now, or who would I build my program around? I think are different questions.
You've got
I probably would take
Grayson McCall, NC State?
I'd probably take Cade Klubnik right now.
Okay.
Just based on ceiling, and I've like watched him camp in person, and I know that
there's
he's
some
got
risk,
the goods.
but
there's some risk, but I think physical attributes and star potential.
Kyle McCord, Syracuse?
Kyle McCord, yes, that's another one. I think I would take Malik Murphy just based on like the Anthony Richardson school of freak athletes, like who figures it out and could be a first round pick one day.
Haynes King probably the most accomplished, if that's the right word. Weird.
You're really selling Haynes King. Even Haynes King is listening to this and rolling his eyes a little bit.
Again, I'm not going as far as to suggest Haynes King is the alpha in this list.
Okay.
I'm just saying, in terms of accomplishment, he was more fun. Like DJU definitely took a step forward for Oregon State and will accomplish things at Florida State in this offense. But Haynes King is frisky in the top group, at least, I would say.
This episode brought to you by a bull semen company or whatever they do, and Haynes King's people.
And his quivering muscle fibers. Was that the phrase that was in your vows? Yeah.
That's right.
This is great. I would give Georgia Tech, independent of the schedule, because I don't think a lot of people look at the schedule. And I don't think Georgia Tech has a lot of buzz, no pun intended, at the moment. But I'd be high fives, low sixes.
I think you have to have a real conversation, and maybe this isn't the day. Can I come back in the summer?
Of course.
Like, what actually is, like, because you mentioned it too, it's like Georgia Tech's high ceiling. It's like, I don't think that the ceiling at Georgia Tech is as high as other people do. Yes, it's in Atlanta, and then that's it.
Right. I think that's how
where
people...
it stops. Yeah. Like, it's just hard because it's actually, like, apparently a very difficult academic
school. It's an excellent school,
both to get into and to exceed expectations in grade-wise.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know if this is a program that's going to be winning ACC titles, even if things go their way in the near future.
No,
so,
I think the relative BTUs would be around consistent 8-ish. Consistent 8-ish, maybe 9 if everything breaks correctly. Between 7 and 9 wins a year. Consistent bowl team, I think, would generate a good amount of quivering muscle fibers. Okay. There's your show.
All right. BTUs, I didn't keep track of them. I'll have to go back. I'll jot these down.
Ole Miss is the ATOL BTU for me. That's a top.
I think Ole Miss is up there on pretty much all of our lists. Ari Wasserman, what are you working on over at The Athletic? I know you've been very busy writing. You've been very busy, of course, with your show until Saturday.
Yeah.
What's new in your world?
Not much really new in my world. I'm going to be running a story heading into signing day next week. Have been talking to a ton of college football staffers about recruiting rules they find stupid and would like to change. It's kind of a way to, preview a national signing day that used to mean something, but now is actually relatively boring. But other than that, no, just Until Saturday podcast at The Athletic and enjoying what I thought was going to be an offseason. You don't know pain until you're packing for a trip to Santa Barbara and Nick Saban retires as you're putting your underwear in. That wasn't fun. And I went to a Tina Turner musical with my wife and my wife's mother. I was on the way to that when Jim Harbaugh retired. So I'm just kind of hoping to get some normalcy back. And next time I come on the show, we need to have like at least a 25-minute block of time scheduled for just a grab-ass topic that has nothing to do with college football. Because I love picking your guys' brains. But I appreciate you having me on. It was fun as always.
Awesome. Ari Wasserman, go and check him out, of course, over on The Athletic. Until Saturday is the name of his podcast. Ari, always fun. We will bring you back again at some point soon. In the meantime, for my normal co-host, Dan Rubenstein, for our guest of honor, Ari Wasserman, we appreciate everybody stopping on by, downloading, listening, supporting the show. Make sure you hit subscribe or follow wherever it is you are listening to us now. We'll catch you all soon. Stay solid.
Peace.